What's up, everybody? We are here today with Eric from Shinedown and Hoogie, guitar tech to Eric and the Stars.
Guitar tech to the stars.
Yeah.
So they say, yeah.
You guys have made the long, horrible trek to Winnipeg.
Everybody keeps saying horrible when they mention Winnipeg, man. And I'm like, I said that I had a great time last night. We went out to this great bar. What was it, King's?
The King's Head?
The King's Head, man. And everybody was like, this is a great local hang. Everybody seemed to be having a great time. I like the vibe here. So I think you owe me an apology.
I owe you
and Winnipeg.
I owe you
awful
and
when I like it here.
All right. So let me know
You
when you
didn't
buy a
say
house.
awful.
I'll find somewhere for you.
Okay.
We'll trade. I live like 3 miles away.
Okay.
And I'll head down to.
Come down to Charleston.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
You can
Come spend a
hang
winter
with me.
here.
Yeah.
No.
Exactly.
I don't do cold very well.
We'll trade in January.
Okay.
January
Oh.
into February.
Ooh.
Your summer home will be in Winnipeg.
I summer in Winnipeg.
So we were talking on the way over here because you know it took us 25-30 minutes to get here.
Yep.
And you were telling a story about kind of like some amps and some stuff that got away, and like your tech Drew there was talking about. I mean, I'll let him tell that story later about what he lost, but it made me.
We
cry.
all have those stories of loss, man.
Yeah.
But it's always self-imposed. Like I don't have any really horrible stories. I do have some. I have one horrible story about some recording equipment I had that got stolen and I never saw again. My roommate ended up with a coke habit and he broke into my room and stole all my recording gear and took off with it, and I never saw him again. So that kind of sucked. But like as far as like the gear that's gotten away, like guitar amps and guitars that have gotten away, it's all self-imposed. Because when I played, I'm a guitar player as well as a bass player, and so when I was playing guitar in bands, I was always after the tone, man. I was always chasing it down. I was tone obsessed with finding whatever that, because I think every player has something in their head that they're trying to find. And by the way, that hasn't changed even in the recording studio with me as far as like just general tones in the studio, drum tones or guitar tones or bass tones. I always have like something that I'm chasing, and it's very rare that you can actually land on that thing that you're looking for, right? You get close, but landing right on it. And I finally did land on this tone that I've been looking for a long time. But in that process, just had some of the coolest heads. And I'm not saying they're the most sought after things, but it's what I thought were some of the coolest heads, like some old Sun heads, Music Man heads. What else did I have? I had some like a anniversary Marshall head that, and I buying and selling all these. A couple of Soldano Hot Rod 50s that like each one cost me $400, and I ended up just getting rid of them. And now it's like, man, I wish I had those things back, There's always that thing. And then in my studio now, my two main heads that I really enjoy is early 80s JCM 800, late 70s JMP. And the JMP, I was telling you this earlier, technically doesn't belong to me anymore.
Yeah.
Technically, it belongs to Eric Rickert, who's my dear friend and just a great engineer and assistant at my studio. But back in the day when we were both playing in two different bands, my band needed a van because our van had shit the bed, and he had an old Ford, like Econoline thing, 70s van, and I said, what do you want for the van? He goes, I want that JMP head. And I said, fuck, we got to get to the show. Okay, but if you ever sell it, you got to sell it back to me. And so I traded in the van for it, and that weekend the van broke down, caught on fire actually, and we had to leave it on the side of the road. And but I've still got the head, but it's technically not mine. That one hasn't gotten away yet, but he knows like it's basically mine. I think he knows that.
Well, I mean, after he sees this, he knows that, or you're going to have some
Yeah.
bargaining to do. You're going to have to figure out what a 70s Econoline is worth in 2022, How about you, Hoogie? Like,
I mean, gear that's gotten away. I've never really. I'm always whatever the dudes I work for,
Right.
Whatever we're using, whatever he's happy with.
so you're saying you're the
or-
roommate with the coke habit that has all the recording?
Basically,
gear?
yes.
Yeah. It's whatever the dudes I'm working with have.
I mean,
that's fine.
That's what I want.
I have a bunch of guitars at home that I've collected over the years, but I've never been that guy to be like, oh, I gotta have this guitar, I gotta have this amp, I have to. Number one, because I have no room because I have too many kids. And and they cost too much money. And number two,
the kids?
yeah, the kids.
Okay,
Yeah.
of course.
Their therapy is going to cost a lot later too. Once we show them.
Once we show them.
Yeah.
And then number two, I'm never at home or at one spot, long enough to like. Some people I know, they'll go search, on days off for gear and this and that. That's, I'll leave their names out of this, Drew. But no, like, yeah, in regards to, there's some guys who are always out there finding great deals, and I'm too busy dabbling in other things, from the artist relations stuff and
the internet has made the deal really impossible at this point.
Yes.
Man.
Yeah.
Like you don't really find, you don't find those things like you used to find wandering into a pawn shop or something, man. Boom, like in the late '90s or early '90s, back early 2000s. You could really find some.
Walk into somewhere and some old lady found this under her bed and she doesn't know what it is. And,
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember buying a PRS guitar. The first PRS I bought, I was in Minneapolis, heading home from like Chicago or somewhere, and the dude I bought it from, like, people, like, reverb wasn't a thing yet, like, so people would be selling on Craigslist, and I'd always, take a couple $1,000 with me if I was going to be in the States for it, because I mean back then that was a big deal to be down in the States for a weekend or whatever, and I'd be like, all right, I'm gonna find something there's no way I'm gonna find when I'm in Winnipeg. And I remember going to this dude's place. I bought this PRS Custom 22, and it was cheap. It was like $1,200, and the dude was telling me that he had just finished selling a '69 Telecaster the day before that he had like inherited from his grandpa, that his parents had been trying to sell for $100 at a garage sale up until about 3 months before he got a hold of it and ended up selling it. And he sold it for $15,000. So like every now and then there's still, I mean that was about 10 years ago now, but there's still every now and then you hear about people that have stupid deals. But I agree with you. Like Sammy and I were talking about that, and about like we wanted to do something where we're we get a little challenge going where each of us take $200 and go to a pawn shop, and we got to buy the best guitar we can buy for $200. And I was like, man,
cool. I love pawn shop guitars, man.
10 years ago, you would have bought something that was worth $1,000 at a pawn shop for $200. You had no idea what it is. Now for $200, you're going to buy about $130 worth of guitar.
Right.
So
and I'll tell you how that's affected me. Like I had it's a '79 Les Paul Custom, black Les Paul Custom, that I bought from Rich Ward,
Fozzy.
from Fozzy. He was in a band called Stuck Mojo at the time, back in the day. Really great band. He sold me this black Les Paul Custom. I forget how much I bought it from him for initially, but fast forward to, this is probably 1998. I had to pay rent, and so I sold it to a friend of mine for $800. And as with most of my deals like that, it's if you sell this, you sell it back to me.
Yeah.
Right. This is also kind of ties in. This is one of those weird stories too. How they say how I know the universe is real. So anyway, fast forward to last record cycle. I think it was Attention record cycle.
Attention.
Yeah, we were on tour, and I was telling the story about how that's one of those guitars that I wish I hadn't sold to this friend of mine back in the day, and I would love to have it back. Blah blah blah. While we're on stage, the guy texts me. I haven't talked to this guy in years. He goes, "Hey, I'm needing to sell some gear. I've got this, and this." And he didn't list the Les Paul in there. He listed a Warwick bass and a Marshall cabinet and some other stuff. And I'm like, man, the only thing I'm interested in is that Les Paul. And he's like, well, I'm not selling that. I'm like, okay, that's fine. But it was a really weird coincidence that and I showed everybody in the band. I'm like, this is strange, man. This dude texted me. 2 days later, he's like, okay, I'll sell you Les Paul. I said, well, how much do you want? He goes, well, how much is it worth? And so I said, here we go. So, and I'm a very honest person. Like, I'm not going to ever rip anybody off. So I went on Reverb and looked and saw what they were going for. A mint condition goes for, I think at the time, at the point I looked, it was like mint condition, really nice player guitars, $2,800 for that guitar. A player version is a little less than that or whatever. I forget how it was, like $1,800 to $2,000 or something for a player, which is what this is. And so I sent him that. I said, here you go, man. And I said that's basically a player, so here's what it's worth. He goes, yeah, I'll take $2,400 for it. He wanted the top number. And I was like, really, man? And he's like, yeah, that's what I want for it. And I'm like, okay. So I had to buy back this guitar that I had sold to him for $800 for $2,400. And then then there was some other ridiculousness that he wanted me to sweeten the deal with after I'd already agreed that he wanted a couple other things too that I ended up making happen. But that's what the internet does to you, man. You know, back in the day, and not that I would have known how much it was worth either, really. Yeah. But I would have offered him a lot less than that, you know.
So I had kind of a similar thing where I had sold my first guitar when I was a teenager. I sold it to my buddy's dad, and about 4 or 5 years ago, I sold it. It was a Kramer XL, you know, just a cheap like HSS Strat, and I sold it to him for $75. And you know, about I don't know, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, his dad messaged me and is like, "Hey, you want that guitar back?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Well, you know, I guess we got to figure out the price." And I'm like, "Here we go." I'm like things in my life have changed since I was 13 years old. So
Right.
14 years old, I'm like, "What do you want?" He's like, I seem to remember that I wrote you a check for $75. So if you could write me a check for $75, you can have it back. And I was like, what's your email?
Man.
I'm like, let me send you that money right now.
I'll send you 100.
Yeah, and he sent it back to me. So I've gotten super lucky with that. And I mean, I'm one of the people that's fortunate that like, you know, I remember my first guitar. I remember getting rid of it, and I was lucky enough to get the actual one back. Because I know lots of guys
rare.
that get like, you know, like I got the same thing, but it wasn't the one.
Yeah.
What was your first guitar?
As you were saying that, I was thinking about it. It really the first guitar that I ever sat down with. My mom had at some point. My mom's a musician. My dad's a naval commander, so there's like my dad has no real musical talent whatsoever. My mom is loaded with it, right? But she decided at some point early in their marriage that she was going to buy my dad a guitar, and she bought him a Harmony tenor guitar, tenor acoustic.
Yeah.
So it just had the top 4 strings on it. And I learned how to play guitar on that. I learned how to. The first thing I did is I would just pick out melodies and learn how to play melodies on the, you know, just usually one string or something, you know.
Yep.
And that led to learning how to play chords. But chords on a tenor guitar were great. You know, it was like a G was one, you know, one finger here. You know, a C was just these 2 strings. It was super easy to learn on. And so I learned on that. And then over the years, I had this thing where I always loved to take things apart and see how they work. And so I ruined that guitar. Like it was I decided to oh, you mean I can put steam on the neck and take the neck off and then put it back on? Well, I never really put it back on. It was just in pieces. And so fairly recently, over the last couple of years, I found one that was the same color and everything on Reverb and bought basically the same. It wasn't the same guitar, but I bought that back. My first electric guitar was a Memphis Strat, a company called Memphis. And it was just it was a pearl white Strat, the white pick guard, and I had that for a few years, and I learned how to kind of, you know, play power chords and AC/DC songs and stuff like that on that, and then I became obsessed with Skid Row, right? And I don't know if you guys remember or not, but Scotty Hill and Rachel Bolan both had these Spectre guitars.
Okay, yeah.
There was like one-offs each one, and Scotty Hill had a red double cutaway Spectre neck through, sort of a Les Paul Jr. kind of thing.
Okay.
Except it had a Floyd Rose on it, and I was obsessed with that guitar. But it was a one-off; like they didn't make them. So I walked into a pawn shop and I found this red Yamaha that kind of looked like it. It was nothing like it, but at the time for me, it was like it looked just like it, and I was obsessed with it. So I traded that Memphis for that Yamaha, and I never saw the Memphis again. I wish I hadn't done that because I'd love to have that guitar back for sure. But how about you, Hoog?
For me, first it was drums. I wanted drums. Got a drum kit. Just I think it was a PV, cheap kit, and then I think it was a bass I got second. I think it was if I recall, it was a Vantage.
Oh yeah.
With the V on the headstock.
Yeah, man.
It was a Sunburst Vantage, and I had that. But my problem is I'm left-handed. So everywhere I would go, they're like, "Oh no, you don't want a left-handed. You want a right-handed, right?" So I started noodling and whatnot with right-handed instruments, and then you know, I fell into all this, hanging out with the wrong people, and became a roadie at the young age of. Started touring when I was 17, 18, right? Yeah. First real guitar I worked on was my roommate. He was in the band, and he had I think it was an '82 Les Paul Custom.
Nice.
And that's always been like, I want to one day get a custom Les Paul. I'd like to get my birth year.
I was gonna say 1980.
1980.
Yeah.
We've talked about
Yeah,
this.
yeah.
I think on here before.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, that would be the. If I were to go out and buy one guitar, it'd probably be something like that.
Was it one of the really nice like color customs, or was it?
No, he
like-
just had a black.
it was a black
Pick guard
custom.
was off. Old, dirty.
Yeah.
Just custom. Yeah.
I don't have a Les Paul custom. Like I've got a number of other Pauls, and you and I started talking about that a while ago. That I was like, I really want to buy a Strat, a Telecaster, and a Les Paul from like we're the same age, but I'm always like, I'm pretty sure the '80s ones aren't that good. Like you never see anybody selling them, and I'm like, I don't think they're.
I hit it pretty good with that. I'm a huge fan of '70s, like the pancake body Les Paul, man.
Yep.
And I was born in '74, so I'm like right in
Nice.
there with those, man. If I can get like anywhere between a 74 to a 78, I love those things. I got a '78 Telly too. That's just it's like we call it the magic Telly in the studio.
Yeah.
It's like it's great for that that third tone. You know, like you got left and right guitar, and then you want to put that third tone down the middle. Just plug this Telly into the same rig, man, and that's actually a trick that Steve Albini talked about. That when I initially started, and I still do, but like when I initially started recording it, I do like one tone over here and like a whole other like amp setup over here on this side, right, to get this kind of more broad stereo sound. And Albini's like, he's like, I'd never do that. He's like, I'll keep the same rig and just change guitars for whatever. And it's like, it's so much more efficient, and it actually glues everything together better. So I started doing that. I started doing like, I'll do like a Les Paul over here, maybe a PRS or you know, one of the Prestiges, or a different Les Paul on this side, and then a Telly down the middle or something like that, man. And it's cool, you know.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I don't know anybody who does that. Most of the guys I know are always like, I need, 6 different amps in the studio, and
Well,
I gotta.
I've been that guy, and,
Yeah.
and I do that. You know, it just depends on what the goal is. But
Yep.
you know, one thing about recording, I'm a studio rat, man. I'm obsessed with recording, and one thing about it is efficiency. Like because it's so easy to get bogged down in. He's looking at me like, he's looking at me right now going, you're a fucking hypocrite. 'Cause he's been in the studio with me. But it's so easy to get bogged down in tones, and you're not getting the performances, because you're searching for so long for this perfect sound to come out, and eventually you just have to go, you know what, let's go. And so if you're just switching guitars around rather than trying to remix something, if you've got a really great tone, something you really love, don't mess with it, at least for the song. I'm also not one of these guys. I don't use the same tone on the whole record. Like I'll get tones for a song, and then literally I'm like, take all the mics off everything. I'll start again for the next song.
Yeah.
That lends some really good individuality to each track, and but in that process, like once you land on something, just try instead of worrying about like a different tone for this, even for your solo, like. I can't count the number of times that it comes time for the guitar solo, and well, why are you going to break out a different amp for a guitar solo? Take the exact same setup and just dime the mids, treble, and bass.
Yep.
I just dime it out and play the solo with that. So it's you got to find that fine line between finding the aesthetic you want for your track, but also efficiency and time, and not hurrying for hurrying's sake, hurrying for a vibe.
Yeah, like we call it option paralysis, right? Like that was my issue. I had a Kemper for a while, and I love digital technology. I think that kind of the way that modeling has kind of come around in the last 5 to 10 years is just phenomenal.
Yep.
My thing that I have a problem with it, and like back when I worked for Two Notes, my issue that I'd always have when they're talking about their Dyne IR system is, they would always say like, well, we've got 500 different virtual cabinets available, and you got 8 mics you can choose to put on them, and a bunch of different rooms that you can choose, which I think for anybody who's trying to find tones, that's great. But for me, I need a boogie style cabinet, like I need a vintage 30 cabinet, I want a Marshall style cabinet, and I want something that sounds Fendery and open back. Mm-hmm. Those are the 3 IRs that I need. And like, if you have a 57 and a 421, or like a 57 and a 121 or something like that on there, like that is every sound that I need. And the rest of it, I want the preamp section from the amp, or I want pedals to do the rest of the lifting for me.
Right.
And I found when I had a Kemper, like I had traded this dude who was going to sell his Kemper to get one of our amps, and I was like, I'd like to mess with one of those. I'm sure we can work something out. So I got his Kemper, and when I got it, it came preloaded with literally like 2,500 profiles. And I'm like going through, and there's like 100 profiles of a 5150 block letter, and I'm just like,
oh, it's
holy shit, man!
You know what
like,
it is? It's fucking Netflix. It's like how much time do you spend?
Yeah.
Looking at what you're going to watch on Netflix versus actually watching something on Netflix. And I've got a Kemper, and I've got the Battlestar Galactica of Kempers because I've never hooked it up to the internet.
Nice.
Like it just lives in its rack, and I don't want anything to fuck with it because they're. But here's the thing: I've got 3 tones in that Kemper that I use.
Yeah.
That's it. I know I can go to them 1, 2, 3 if I need a certain thing. I'm gonna be a super fucking hypocrite right now. But the first song on our new record is called No Sleep Tonight.
Yeah.
I had the one tone on the left side that I was digging a lot and was doing it, and then when I switched over to try to use that same tone on the other side of the different guitar, it wasn't doing it. I just went to the Kemper and went. So the right hand tone on that song is a Kemper because I just knew that it did this certain thing. But I have not dug into it because for me, it's great for demos. Like if you're doing a demo or something, man, and you just want to go real fast, it's great. But when it comes time to make a record or your song or your thing that's going to last forever, you want something that's more unique than that. And I'm not saying you can't get unique tones out of a digital head. You totally can. But for me, it's something. There's just something great about the audio aesthetic of like finding something that is yours and yours alone that no one's ever going to be able to recreate. And that goes for also in the studio for drum sounds or for hand claps or for whatever. I don't ever use canned stuff, because I don't want anybody to be able to get the stuff that I did, And I was just listening on the plane, that band Turnstile, their latest record, and the guitar tone on that record, it's not the best tone I've ever heard, but I've got this affection for it now because it's theirs. Like you can hear the fact that it's super scoopy, but I know that tone. It's not perfect. But it's punk rock as hell, man, and it's nice. It's real. It's like it's something that would be hard to recreate.
Yeah. Man, you're gonna kill me because one of the other questions I was gonna ask you then is like, what is one of your like secret weapon things that you would use, like a piece of gear that people be amazed is? Like I got lots of buddies that we were talking about a little bit about that. Like you were talking about a fuzz pedal. It was like like a $20 fuzz or $40 fuzz. That I got a buddy who's has tons of pedals like that you'd be amazed that he's got all of this shit that's like $500 to $1,000 boutique pedals, and then he's got these things that are like Amazon. $30 that are like just ridiculous. Yeah,
it's. I'm not going to name any names, but it quite often amazes me how many useless pedals I buy, or I receive, or I get. Not from you guys. No, but I'm just saying, like.
It's over.
No,
it's over. Shinedown.
No. Yeah. What I'm saying is, you plug in a pedal and you're like, okay. Give me a scenario where I would actually use this, right? Like it doesn't sound that great. It's a fuzz pedal, but like. By the way, I know nothing about making pedals, so I'm in a room full of people that do. So you can all clap back at me and tell me I'm completely wrong. But why would you want a fuzz pedal that just sounds mushy, gushy, and washed out? Like how much R&D did you do on this thing that like is almost unusable for anything? Right? Not talking about you guys. I say you guys. I don't mean you guys. I mean just I'm hypothetically talking to the person who made this pedal, right? And then every once in a while though you come across that one that's like, oh, that's it, man. Like they spent time on this.
Yep.
And I will give you one of my. I said earlier I'm looking down at on this pedal board is a pedal I use all the time, and I do consider this a secret weapon. Is the purple Revv pedal, man, the G3. Yeah, I use that. I everything at 12 o'clock.
Yep.
And again, I use it for, I know we just talked about using different guitars, but, if I'm not using that telly down the middle or something, if I'm going to use a Les Paul, that pedal just does this really cool mid-range thing that I love. And I use it. It adds so much to, because, when I need some aggression and like a big riff is about to happen, we're clearing the vocals out and we're just going to riff it, that thing all the time. And it's so useful. so useful to me. That's that's just one of those like go to. In fact, I have a setting in my Kemper that says Revv pedal.
Nice.
And it's like I know that like if I need it quick, I can plug that pedal into the Kemper, and it'll do the thing.
That's awesome.
You know, so that's one of my secret weapons.
All right.
And it just happens to be sitting right here. So one of. I mean,
Nice.
there are tons of other stuff, man. That I'll tell you my biggest secret weapon in the studio. If you listen hard on Shinedown records, you can hear it. And other things I've produced is piano.
Yep.
Like I use during choruses, bass notes, big octave bass notes on the piano, underneath everything, just as hard as you can lay into it. And then like a song like Cut the Chord, right?
Yep.
That riff, like doubling the riffs with pianos.
Very cool.
And just laying it in underneath. That's like a big, like anybody who's just getting into the studio, or if you've been there for a while, you've never experimented with that, do it. Like use pianos, man, because they sing, and not only do they sing, but they're stereo, right? So you just drop them in on your choruses, and they just breathe life into everything. So.
That's awesome. I do no studio work, so Dorian, you're gonna have to. Dorian's sitting there just like behind the camera taking notes.
Well, because there's tons of stuff you can find for the studio that's like, what's the right term? Like, electrical, right? Like pedals
Yes.
and amps and stuff like that. There's always that stuff around, and I always try to think outside the box. Like, well, everything for me is a vibe. So I'm like, well, acoustical things. Like if I can find ways to make noise with acoustical things, like banging on a Pelican case and distorting it, or a garage door, or like, creating soundscapes that are only that I would be hard pressed to recreate, and I don't want anybody else trying to recreate them either,
Yeah.
It's like finding that's where you find your individuality, and whether I achieve it all the time, I don't know, but it's that for me, those are the secret weapons in the recording studio for me. It's just like, what's something out of the box that I could do here,
Yeah, that's awesome. Like and I get what you're saying about acoustical instruments. Like that's one of the things that I always find is difficult about when you're doing stuff where you're on in-ears or where anything is running direct. And I mean it's also hypocritical because we make amps that allow you to run direct because it's the world we currently live in.
There's nothing wrong with any of that, man. Like
No.
again, I'm talking all over top.
No, you're good. You're good.
Everybody. It's use the tools you have at your disposal.
Yes.
For God's sakes, I mean they're there for a reason. People want to talk trash about Auto-Tune and Pro Tools and all this stuff, and I was like, if you don't think the fucking Beatles would have used Pro Tools,
Oh yeah.
and if you don't think they would have used everything at their disposal, which is what they did at the time, I mean, how many studio tricks did the Beatles use that at the time people would have said, oh, that's
Yeah.
What's the piano solo that George Martin did where he slowed the tape down and played the piano solo and sped it back up?
Yeah.
In My Life, that piano solo is like totally played at half speed and then sped back up again because they couldn't play it that fast.
Yeah.
Well, if you don't think they would have used everything in the box if they had the
Absolutely. Like I've often thought, like, I mean, this is probably going to be, sacrilegious for a lot of people, but like, what would Hendrix sound like today? Like, what would Stevie Ray Vaughan sound like today? Like with the amps that are on the market. I'm not talking about our amps. I'm talking about like you get into the Bad Cats and like stuff like the Two Rocks and Divided by 13s and stuff like that. Like what stuff would some of those iconic players, like how would they sound if they were around today, or would they use any of it?
I guess they'd sound like
them?
Zach White and Gary Clark Jr. I don't know. I mean, like that's kind of the for me. It's like I think about what you're saying, and cats like that are like the example of those types of players now, right? So, whatever those guys are doing, and the thing I love about, especially Jack, man, he's innovating all the time.
Yeah.
Which is what people like Hendrix did, and Gilmore and all these players that I love from that era, Pete Townsend, they all innovated, and again, it's we've got so much technology at our disposal now it's like, what does that even mean to innovate as a player? It's like, you really have to strive that much harder, I think. Maybe that's how they felt back in the day too. But, it's, to think outside of the box, it's a much bigger box now, right?
Yeah, well, and like we said, that you can get bogged down with option paralysis. Like we were sitting down for our last live stream talking about we're building new pedal boards for Sam and I, just because my actual board is that one over there that's always in pieces and never works. So, so we started going through like all these great drive pedals that we've collected, and like. It took us a solid hour or two before we even got to the live stream to narrow it down to like, okay, these are the ones that we're actually gonna kind of shoot out a little bit to see, and I mean, and that's just a drop in the bucket for what's available now. Yeah. You know what I mean? And I know that there's a ton of guys, and we see it with like, I see it on forums and stuff all the time where you get guys that are just flipping gear, like they just flip through the latest amp, the latest pedal, and they don't sit and play very much. Do you know what I mean?
Yep.
And they're on that like kind of tone quest like you talked about, where it's like that becomes the focus rather than creating or playing. Which, I'm a little bit in that space that I don't write music anymore or do that much, but I love finding sounds and I love messing with stuff, but I don't do that much with it after the fact.
Yeah, they're always cooking omelets but never eating eggs.
That's right. Yeah. Which, I mean, if you're somebody like me that I'm not making a career out of writing music, that's part of the fun, right?
Well, so I'll ask you a question then. Like, what do you do when you land on something that you're like, because we all had that moment of like, what the fuck just happened? Like, this sounds amazing. Like, because like knowing that you're not going to stop there, do you make a note? What do you do? Do you just enjoy it for a few days and move on?
Yeah, I just sit. I know when I did that because an hour and a half passes, and normally I get 10 minutes. Is when I sit down before somebody comes and interrupts me for something, whether it's wife and kids or whether it's somebody at work. And if I all of a sudden sit down and I'm like, shit, it's been 2 hours and I'm still here playing. And I'm like, and that's why like I showed you that, and anybody who watches our live stream knows this. I showed them the Snowbletone Daily Driver. I'm like, this pedal is the best, like, low to medium gain overdrive that I have played, because it's the thing that the second I plugged it in, that's it. I was gone. I found the sound that I wanted, and I sat there for an hour and a half or two, and then my wife is like texting me being like, are you coming in? And I'm like, oh yeah. Like I was trying to figure out this thing.
This is the best thing about my wife is that she rides horses, so we put a barn up at the front of that. Like she's like, the barn's like her she shed.
Yeah.
The studio's right outside the house.
Yep.
And so like I can literally use the excuse that I'm at work.
Yeah.
It's like I can't come in right now. I'm in the middle of something. Like you need to figure it out, man.
I did have that. So the Revv shop used to be right behind my house.
So
and my wife was like, nah. like I know you're lying. You're coming in now. Now my wife is great.
I actually have a technical question.
Yeah.
That I don't know about, and Drew, who's also here, he can chime in from behind the camera because he might know this. But I've been wanting in the studio to make because I have just ridiculous amounts of pedals. I said earlier, some of them I've never even turned on before.
Right.
I literally will buy stuff and just kind of, I won't plug it in right away. This looks like it would be fun, and I'll just put it off to the side. And then later on, when I need creativity, when I don't know what this does. What does this sound like? And I'll grab it and plug it in. To me, that's magical. It's almost like finding a new chord on the guitar you didn't know existed or something, right? How would I go about making not a pedal board, but like hooking up all those pedals in the studio to where I could literally just plug in one side, out the other, and then just hit them in the like this instead of having to go through and plug them. Is there a way to do that without it being just super noisy or unusable or what?
I mean, there is. I was gonna say.
So, like, but what like is there a noise floor involved in that? Is there signal degradation involved in that when you have that many things plugged into each other?
It depends on the quality of what pedals you're using and stuff like that. I think.
Well, Revv pedals.
Yeah, then you're fine.
Yeah. No, I do. I've got every pedal on this board down here, I think.
Yeah.
So they would be part of that for sure. But
I mean, I think it like there's so many factors, right? Like your power supplies, if you're using like buffers or what you're doing. So there is a way to do it. What I would do is I would put them in groups and I would build boards. And I would have it that you can click together a series of boards so that if you're like, okay, I want to go through, I'm looking for, I want to go through reverbs, and you set that board down, plug that in, and that way when you're troubleshooting it, because there is issues with noise, right? Like if you're not, especially if you're using drive pedals, then you're only troubleshooting one board at a time.
This is good. This is gonna become a thing with me, and I'm gonna dig myself a hole that I can't get out of. Is what's gonna happen, because I've been thinking. We talked about this,
during the last record.
I've literally thought about, because I'm gonna, at some point over the next couple of years, I'm gonna build a new control room in the studio. It's a little bigger than the control room I have now, and I thought about just making one of the walls just like pedals, where I can just like hit, do whatever. And then if I want to pull it, if I actually want to stomp it, I can pull it off and plug it in like that, and then you have it on the floor. But like literally just having a wall of pedals.
Do it.
I just didn't know if that was possible or not, because again, I'm not a very technical person when it comes to this kind of stuff. I'm the kid who when I was first learned how to play guitar, I thought I had invented the multi-track recorder, right? I didn't know that I had not, but I thought I did, because I have 3 sisters, and I stole their stereos, and I plugged into the RCA on the back of this one and recorded something, and then I would play it out into this one and plug into this one and record here, and like I'd just go around the room like this. And then my mom saw what I was doing. She's like, "Oh, we need to get you like a multi-track recorder." I'm like, "What do you mean?" And she's like, "Oh, they make these recorders that actually do that." So she went out and got me a Yamaha 4-track recorder, and I proceeded to blow it up, because I didn't know that. Again, my mom was a musician, so I had her '69 Bassman head and cab back in the day. And so I plugged into the Bassman head out of the speaker jack into the fucking and just blew everything up. Blew up the head, blew up the recorder. Like, I didn't know you couldn't do that. So that was the beginning of my ill-fated. That's why I have to ask questions about how many pedals can I plug in. I don't know.
I mean, I think a lot of us do that. Like, I remember when I got my first head, I remember not plugging my speaker cabinet in, or like the cable coming unplugged, and all of a sudden I'm like, "Oh, there's a flashlight, nothing works."
We talked about this earlier too. Yeah. My first distortion pedal, I had that same Bassman head and cab. I was very blessed to have that as a kid. I still have her 73 key Rhodes keyboard that she played through it too.
Nice.
But I didn't know you went through the pedal, right? So I plugged my guitar into the head, and then I plugged the pedal into the head, and I'm like, "Why isn't this working?" And my uncle had to go, "Oh, you got to go through the pedal." I'm like, "Oh."
Yeah.
Okay. Not the brightest guy.
Well,
but I got it figured out eventually.
Yeah. It seems you seem to be doing okay with it now.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got it sorted.
So I'm obviously not the person that needs to figure out how to wire up a bunch of pedals.
I mean, I'm not the right guy. I'd tap Manny here in our shop to be like, "Hey, right. Manny, I need these pedal boards wired up." And I've always been bad for that, of like figuring out like, okay, what's your proper order when you're building a pedal board? Like, do you want drives first? Like, where's your obvious, like for me, your volume pedal goes at the beginning, right? Like, I've never used noise gates, honestly, until the G8. Everybody who knows us.
By the way, man, that's a great noise gate too, because I've just, you'd think that you discovered this a long time ago. I've recently discovered the benefits of noise gate with recording guitar a lot more. So it's been hugely helpful.
Well, when we went to, when Dan designed the noise gate and we went to use it, I was like, no one's gonna buy this, because honestly, I base a lot of how we're gonna do things on, would I buy this? Because I'm the average guitar player, and I'm like, I don't use noise gates. Like, I just roll my volume off if I don't want it to be noisy. And this was the first noise gate that I've played where you could set the threshold low enough that it didn't feel like it was cutting me off at the knees. Like the sustain, it holds long enough that
metal guys love the noise gates, man. Cause it gives them that tight attack, tight release. They dig that. I use it in my rig. I use it in my bass rig. I've got I have a single coil pickup in my bass, so you can imagine the buzz situation with that. So it's awesome, man. And you're right too. It doesn't. I've never once felt like that it's inhibiting me in any way. Like, my bass will just sustain out until I'm ready to cut it off, and then it works really well.
That was the thing. Like, I had Sammy, because Sammy's our resident metal kid, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, when Dan brought it in, I'm like, can you show me how this works? Because I have no idea how noise gates work, and I'm like, and I have to try to sell it.
They're great for again, you don't really. It's one of those pedals that you don't realize you need it until you try it one time and then remove it.
Yeah.
And again, I've probably said this ad nauseum today, but one of my things with that I don't like about certain drive tones or gain stages is kind of mushiness or gushiness, you know.
Yeah.
And a noise gate will take care of a lot of that. If you have a really good one, where like when you attack it, it's on and then off.
Yep.
And you can have a pedal maybe or an amp tone that is a little bit mushy, but when you put the noise gate in front of it, it kind of removes that, and then you can it will make sometimes what I would consider an unusable tone really great. You know?
Yeah. I like I said, I just once we released this, that's when I actually started playing. Well, actually, I'll be honest. Once Manny put it on a board that I use, I started using it. So, you know, and now I'm like, oh, yeah, I like that. That works well. Man. It does its thing.
Yeah, it's again, and I'm sort of a newcomer to it, to really using them in the studio, because I've often, you know, not thought about them as being something to use in the studio, almost like any kind of gate, like, you know, like even gates on toms and that kind of thing. You know,
Yep.
You don't really use that in the studio, right? So gates were never really on my radar that much, and then suddenly it was like, oh wow, man, this is, you know, because that's the only gate I've ever had in a studio. Is when Hoogie brought it to me, and I was like, well, let's see what it does, and I was like, oh, yeah,
Nice.
This is doing nice things.
Yeah.
So,
Everything is quiet.
yep.
Everything does what I want it to do.
Again, it's more about the attack and the aggression's a bad term, but like, you know, when you hit the pick and just
We have no problem with using the word aggression.
Yeah.
It's on all
that's
of our
what
amps.
that's what it's
We're
about
good.
for me. Yeah. Yep.
Nice. Awesome. Well, yeah, man, that's it. Just wanted to chat with some gear and.
Ta-da!
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
we did it.
we did it.
Yeah.
All right. I would like to thank Revv Amps for having me and for having my better half Hoogie here. We really appreciate it. As we say it down south, we appreciate you.